Hey everybody, Zach again at newtutorial.com coming in making a video for you today. I have this, we've talked about this before on my channel about Mount Sinai and, the Greater Exodus is obviously a topic that a lot of people talk about, including me on this channel. I have a whole video series on the Greater Exodus and how I see things playing out in the last days. However, there is, there's this idea that maybe one day during this Exodus that we're going to be going back to Mount Sinai. And I tend to, when I first started investigating all this, I was definitely on board with that direction. As I continued to investigate further, I was more along the lines that I think we're going to the Mount of Olives during this Exodus. Good friend of mine, Steve Mutria, is very much in the camp of going back to Mount Sinai. My opinion is I really don't know. I mean, there's good evidence for both in Scripture, so it could be either one. But it's definitely something to investigate. I think you'll have a fun time investigating this topic, and that's why, my friend, I have really enjoyed this book called The Gold of Exodus. Now, a friend of mine, David Coatney, some of you guys know him. He was the producer and director of the Mystery Stone documentary that I talked about earlier a few months back. Great film. If you haven't checked it out yet, please see that. He gave me this book right here, The Gold of Exodus, and I said, I'm going to read this, and it's written like a novel, even though it's all true. It's a true story of Larry Williams and Bob Cornuke, who go through and they sneak into Jabal Al Lawz and get into what is Mount Sinai and discover the real Mount Sinai back in like the 1990s. So it's got a lot of history behind it. It's got a lot of lead up to it. It's written like a spy novel, but the real cool part is that it's all true. And so really interesting book. I wanted to talk about this today and recommend it because I think I have never heard of this book before until David gave it to me. And I think it's been off a lot of people's radar because really this Torah movement, the Hebrew roots movement, didn't really get started until maybe about 9 or 8 years ago or so. I mean, really take off. So 8 or 9 years ago. Well, this book came out like 20 years ago. So this missed a lot of people's radars, I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all my audience out there, you've read this book or you've known about the book, and tell me in the comments below if I'm wrong on this. But I haven't heard a lot about this since we've been in the movement and are researching the Hebrew origins of our faith, things like that, and also investigating things like the Greater Exodus. This is really, really interesting. So all that, I'm going to just kind of go over, I guess, quickly the book, and then I'm going to stop the tape and let people who have not yet read the book jump off the train because I'm going to go through some spoilers. And I want to address some of the things that are in the book. And I'm also going to be doing a video coming up at some point on the difficulties of biblical archaeology by believers. I'll do a whole separate video on that because I've been, as I research a lot of these different topics that have to do with biblical archaeology and people who are familiar with, Ron Wyatt's work and so many others. I did a video earlier this year on the discovery of 1 million graves in Egypt, which was basically discovered by the Brigham Young University team, the Mormons, when they were over in Egypt. There's just a lot of difficulties when it comes to biblical archaeology from a biblical perspective, from paying institutions who believe in the Bible. So I want to do a whole separate video on that. On this, we'll talk about the book, but then we're going to give you a chance to get off the train, spoiler alert, and then if you want to read the book, come back, watch this video, and then we'll talk about this, okay? Give you some of my opinions on some things I think they got right and some things I think they got wrong. But I won't get into that yet. First off, let's just quickly say this is a good book. I really enjoyed the book. I think you should check it out. If you haven't had a chance yet, you can buy. I'll give you a warning though, real quick. If you order the audiobook from Audible.com, which is an Amazon company, they are going to gyp you. You're not going to get the whole book in that audiobook. We were following along. Me and my wife were following along with the book and with the audio version, and they skip sometimes like entire pages and a half. So don't get the audiobook from Amazon. They will gyp you on some of the content. It's best, I think, just to go ahead and pick up a hard copy. I know some people are like, oh, I don't do hard copies. Just go the old-fashioned route and pick up a book and read it. I think you'll enjoy it. So for those of you who are readers out there, you can read the book. Also, there's no instances of any type of, what do you call it? Indecent exposure in the book. Parental advisory. I mean, there's probably a couple curse words in the book, probably enough you can barely count on one hand. So it's very, very low. But there are no instances of any type of indecency when it comes sexually or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about that. Especially if your teenager wants to read the book, I think it'd be fine for them. So someone like an older teenager should be able to read this book and get a lot out of it and enjoy it. It's written like a spy novel. It's written like an adventure novel, like a Tom Clancy thriller, but without a lot of the things in those books that parents who are trying to protect their children from would have to worry about. Yeah, that's about it, I guess. Great adventure book. Really enjoyed it. And I'm actually going to order a couple copies. I asked Steve Mutria the other day, I was like, do you read? And he's like, no, I don't really have time to read. And I said, well, he's got so many things on his plate, study-wise. throwing another book at him is probably just not going to work. So, but I wanted to buy him a copy. I do have a couple other people in mind. I'm going to be buying some extra copies, and I got to see if David wants this copy back since he lent it to me. And then I'm going to try to give some copies away to some friends that I know. So anyway, check it out. Go find the Gold of Exodus. You're really going to enjoy it. All right, now this is the point we're going to stop the video, and I'm going to take you down the road of things that I disagree and agree with in the book. And so if you don't want any spoiler alert, this is where you need to jump off the train and come back after you've read the book. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're back. This is a satellite photo of Jabal Al Lawz, and it is in Mount Sinai. It is the Mount Sinai, what I believe is the real Mount Sinai that's located in Saudi Arabia. And so this is what the book entails. Is the real Mount Sinai. And so just really quick, let me go ahead and give you the map that this book gives you at the beginning of the book. It gives the proposed map by the people who are in the book, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams. And so they proposed that the pathway was this way out of Egypt, down through the Sinai Peninsula and around the bottom here, and then there was the crossover at the Strait of Tiran, and then crossing over they find what they call the springs of Marah, which were the bitter waters that were made sweet, and Elim, which was the 70 palm trees and a well, and then on to Jabal Al Lawz. So this is what I disagree with. I disagree with this pathway, and for a number of reasons. And I have two scriptures, especially, and also just some common sense. This book was written back in like the 1990s, and I think we have a whole lot more information. 20 years ago, we have a whole lot more information out today that they didn't have back then, especially other expeditions and other people who have snuck into this mountain and have taken photos, brought photos back, and so we have a lot more information than we had back then. So I think even though this book is 20 years old, it'd be great if Howard Bloom, who was the writer, would update this, maybe even write a part 2 to it. It'd be great. So, but I think this is an error. And I'll give you my reasons why. What I think of as a better explanation to this is that they left Egypt up here. They crossed out through Goshen, coming through here, and then they came back. Let me zoom out a little bit. They came back through the peninsula and wandered in and out of this area. Because here's the deal. It says they were kind of lost in the wilderness. We'll go through the verses in a minute. But according to this map, all they're doing is just following the coast, right? Well, if that's the case, you're not really lost when you follow a coastline. You always know where you're at. There's going to be somebody who is in that group of 2, 3, 4, 5 million people who knows their way around, who understands where they're at when they're just following a coastline. So if that's where they're at, you can't really be, entangled in the wilderness or lost in the wilderness like the Bible says they were, if you're just following a coastline. Because, what's one of the first survival things you learn about in survival class or survivalist training is that you follow water, you follow streams, you follow creeks down to rivers, and eventually you reach a coast, and that way you find out where you're at. It's the easiest way to find out where you're at. But you're not lost if you're just following a coastline. And so they say they crossed here. What actually makes more sense is that they came through here, went through the wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula, and crossed over at this beachhead. Let's just go ahead and go through some of these verses. First off, we'll go through Exodus 14, chapter 14, verse 3. It says, "For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land," or lost in the land, some translations say. "The wilderness has closed them in." So if you go through, let's go back to this map here. If you go through this all these mountain ranges and all these mountains here and valleys and stuff, and you end up, on this giant beach with 3 to 5 million people, which would definitely hold 3 to 5 million people, and Pharaoh's army is coming in behind you, that would definitely be a thing to say that, they're entangled in the wilderness. For Pharaoh will say they're lost in the wilderness. The wilderness has shut them in. Because there's nowhere for them. If they're on the beach, there's nowhere for them to go. There's mountains north, and there's mountains south. They had this one pathway in, this one giant pathway in, and that's it. So, these roads here have been built later, but it's not enough where 3 or 5 million people can move quickly. So they're kind of trapped here. And then if you go down to the proposed crossing site, they're not really trapped in. There's lots of places for them to go here. They could go north if they wanted to. They could go back east, or I'm sorry, west if they wanted to. So I don't see how they're entrapped here, like they would be if they were up north a little bit in the Gulf of Aqaba on that beach right here, right? So let's go ahead and go with these other verses here real quick. So Exodus 14, verse 19, and Exodus 14, verse 20. "And the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before them and stood behind them." So they were being led by the cloud, and the cloud goes from in front of them to behind them. So it came, verse 20, "So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel." So it was dividing the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of the Israelites so that they could not, get at one another. It was a protection. Well, go back to our map here. If this is where Pharaoh's army is coming in, and they're all here, and Israel is here, putting a pillar of fire right here would be a great spot to, protect the children of Israel. There's no way, you can't go up these mountains. You can't put chariots up on these things. You can't put chariots over on this side. And there's basically cliff sides on either side of this path. So then you go down here. Let me get there. We're going to get there. Here we go. There's nowhere really to put a pillar of fire. If they're coming from this way. Oh, wait a minute. We're not there yet. There we are. Are we getting there close? Yeah. If the children of Israel are coming in, let's zoom out a little bit, coming in this way, as proposed, like what they're saying, there's nowhere really for a pillar of fire to block. You can go around. There would have to be a pillar of fire the size of an F5 tornado for you to not be able to get around it and get to the children of Israel, from Pharaoh's army. So I see a far less likely scenario here. But the biggest evidence, I think, that shows that this was not the right path as proposed by the book is because there was zero archaeological evidence found here. The authors, or the people in the book, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams, stayed 3 days diving and searching for different artifacts in the shallow waters for the crossing. And they found none. Not anything. Nothing. Not even trash, really. They found nothing. So there was nothing really here archaeological to justify that there was a crossing here, even though they searched for 3 days. And here, there has been lots of archaeological evidence found both on this shore and on this shore over here. There's a pillar on this side and a pillar on this side with ancient Hebrew inscriptions written on it, supposedly set up by King Solomon as marking the crossing site. And also, there obviously, if you've seen the pictures, lots of different artifacts buried in here. The encrusted chariot wheels and chariots that were found in this area, in this crossing. And if you look at it on a sea map, you can see where there would definitely be a crossing between these two areas in the Gulf of Aqaba. So I definitely, I'm more, because of the archaeological evidence found here and just the logistics of it and the verbiage in scripture of them being entangled and entrapped in the wilderness, I see this as the more likely scenario. And most Bible scholars today who argue this more lean towards this as well. So and again, this book was written 20 years ago, before we had a lot more information than we have now. So probably, they were going by the information they had, and they were making their best guess based on, the information they had. So I think maybe today their guess might be different. I don't know. I've never tried to contact these guys or Howard Bloom to see what the latest and greatest story is. But at this point, they cross over, and then Jabal Al Lawz is right here. Now, if you look at the bottom screen here, 5 miles is basically every inch on the screen. So you got about 40 miles as the bird flies from Jabal Al Lawz to, Jabal Al Lawz to the crossing point on the other side. So approximately maybe 40 miles or less, as the crow flies. Now, obviously, you can't go that way because of all these mountains and valleys and stuff like that. But they say that they came across here. The proposed book proposes that they came here and they found the springs of Mara, the bitter waters, which are basically alkali flats. Now, Montana, North Dakota, Utah, Wyoming, a lot of the places up in the north of our country have alkali flats. And these are flat areas that when they fill up with water, the waters are very bitter because they're so alkaline. And Saudi Arabia also has these things all over the country, alkali flats. And so they found an alkali flat around this area here, and they say, oh, well, that must be the springs of Mara because the waters were bitter. And then they find an oasis near Al-Bad and with some palm trees, and they say this was the area of Alim and the 70 palm trees. But it's just an oasis. They found no archaeological evidence at either location. So it's my opinion, even though the cross site I believe is up here, there's alkali flats up here, there's oases up here, there are settlements up here that they could have come to, and so that they have these mixed up with, I think, the actual locations. El-Bad, which is Elim, and then the springs of Mara. I think those could easily just as well be up here because there are oases and alkali flats in these areas. So there you go. So Jabal Al Lawz, there it is. And so let's go back to this map here. This is a close-up of Jabal Al Lawz, and you can see the top of the mountain is blackened. There's obviously a great deal of debate online between Christian scholars, biblical scholars, and secular scholars as well that argue against this site. I think there's a lot of people who argue for this being the site of the real Mount Sinai, but you can, if you want more information, you can kind of get into that and look at the information you want itself. Now, since this book has been published, and the book talks about Project Falcon from the Saudi Arabians' perspective as they were trying to build weapons that would be able to put them as a formidable military force throughout the Middle East. And they supposedly have radar towers up on here. I think 2 radar towers up on top of the mountain. Well, I have scoured this mountain all around, and I mean every direction where I can see that there's height, even the surrounding peaks, and I have yet to find an actual couple of radar towers put up. And that's the thing, when it comes to national security stuff, these things can be easily removed from different satellite imagery. But the satellite imagery on these are very, very good. Let's go ahead and zoom out. I'll show you where the military installation is now that they have. So there's Jabal Al Lawz. They do have one military installation that is on the map. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is a definite military installation. You can see the fence around, and supposedly the entire mountain is surrounded by fencing. I didn't really look too close to see other fencing, but this is a definite military installation. You have what is probably a radar station here. You have, looks like a power plant here. I can't tell if that's a power plant, but it looks awfully like one that would have most of the infrastructure underground, because you can see the drive-in underground. So there's probably a power plant here. There's another underground bunker here with obviously air conditioning units or whatever that is up there, but definite military. It's all protected by fencing. You have a guard gate here that Basically, you have to pass a checkpoint to get into the rest of the base. You have a helipad up here. So definite military installation here right north of Jabal Al Lawz. And I've trying to look around and try to find other assets, military assets in the area. I'm having a hard time finding any more real actual military assets in the area, even though people say that there are more. But those are from eyewitness accounts. Satellite imagery can be altered to keep out national secrets, and you probably most of you guys know that Saudi Arabia and the United States are pretty close allies. So if Saudi Arabia requests that some things be removed from Google satellite imagery or imagery that's available to the public, the U.S. is probably going to comply and go along with that. So there it is, Jabal Al Lawz, and really interesting. And then you have over here, I think this is called, let me see if I can find it. Where'd it go? Yeah, Almond Mountain. So there's two mountains right next to each other. But obviously, if you zoom in here, you can see the blackness of this, and they equate it to ancient, prehistoric. The secular scientists will tell you that, oh, this is from lava flows thousands and millions of years ago. Well, if the creator, if the Father's fire descended on Mount Sinai, how hot was that fire? Did it turn it back to lava? Did it turn it back to molten rock? Well, then it would be blackened. But the secular people are going to come around and see any blackened rock or molten rock and say, "Oh, that's millions of years old." Well, you and I both know the real story. So, anyway, that's kind of my opinion on this thing. I think that this is definitely the real Jabal Al Lawz. They found all kinds of artifacts on site. They found the cave of Elijah. They found all of the 12 pillars of Israel set up. I don't know where they're at on this map. Maybe someone else can show you, but there's plenty of other pictures of these things on Google Images, or people who got close enough took photos of them. They also found in the book the number of boundary markers that Moses puts up to keep the people away from the mountain. They also find tons of hieroglyphics on all the rocks that have been put up that are around the mountain, so that's really interesting, and in different areas around the mountain. So it's hard to look at something from an overhead view and know where everything is at when you get such a different view from being on the ground, boots on the ground. But I'm convinced that this is the real Mount Sinai, based on the amount of evidence found, archaeological evidence found, and just all in general. In my opinion, they found it. This is it, Jabal Al Lawz, the real Mount Sinai. Now, the Catholic Church is going to tell you that St. Catherine's monastery over here is by the real Mount Sinai, called Mount Catherine. So they're going to tell you that this is the real Mount Sinai, but I don't believe that, for a second. But, that's the Catholic Church. What are you going to do? All right, there you go. I just thought you would enjoy that. I'm trying to think of anything else in here that I'd like to mention. Again, just a fascinating book. Even though I don't agree with the path on how they got there as being the true path of the Hebrews, there was so much else in here that was fascinating, including the backstory of what was going on between different governments at the time. There was a really cool story in here that Israel was obviously monitoring this whole situation as Project Falcon was getting off the ground with the Saudi Arabian government, and obviously the Saudis' original concern is Israel as a military power. Today, Saudi Arabia is more concerned with Iran and the direct threats from the Iranian government to Saudi Arabia, because everyone in the Middle East, someone explained it to me this way, everyone in the Middle East hates the House of Saud, and the Saudi Arabian government has more to fear from the Iran and Hezbollah and the Jordanians and the Assyrians more than it does the Hebrews, or the Israelis. But the whole Project Falcon thing, I guess at some point when their original concern was Israel bombed one of their, escaped under their radar into Saudi Arabia and bombed one of their airports with live pigs as a kind of a message to send to them that none of your radar advances or military technology is going to be able to stop us. And if we want to hit you, we can hit you. And so to make that point, they dropped a bunch of live pigs on the runways at a Saudi military base, which I thought was kind of entertaining. Anyway, lots of great stuff in here. Most of it all, all true. I mean, it's a lot of it. It's a very true story. And you can read the excerpts from the end. It talks about how he got a lot of the information and how he sourced it in the book. So, very cool book. I really enjoyed it. I think you'll enjoy it too. All right. If you read the book, leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. And again, we'll do a video on the difficulties of biblical archaeology at some point in the future, very, very, very soon, because it's something that I really enjoy talking about. And a lot of people, I guess, have questions about why it's so hard for these things like this, like Jabal Al Lawz, to be known. Why isn't this like on the front page of every Christian, magazine? Why are we not talking about this? Well, there's lots of reasons. We'll talk about that in another video. All right, I'll leave it at that. Go home, read your Bible. Thanks.